Hello and welcome to the monthly webinar for the Three Principles Global Community. The Three Principles Global Community, known as 3PGC, is a nonprofit organization that's committed to bringing an understanding of the three principles to people throughout the world. Today I'm with Dr. Linda Sandel Pettit. Dr. Linda Sandel Pettit, counseling psychologist, is also the Dean of the Graduate College and Director of Counselor Education for Siena Heights University, located in Michigan in the United States. In her role, Linda oversees graduate degrees in teacher education, counselor education, and in organizational, healthcare, and higher education leadership. Before joining Siena, Linda provided mental health-related coaching, training, consulting, and speaking for over 30 years in private practice, hospital, community agency, business, and school settings. Linda holds a doctorate in counseling psychology from West Virginia University, a master's degree in counselor education from Siena Heights University, and a bachelor's degree in journalism from Michigan State University. Her work has been grounded in the Three Principles understanding for 10 years. She's married to Three Principles facilitator and psychiatrist Dr. Bill Pettit, and they co-own Three Principles Intervention, LLC. So thank you again, Linda, for joining us, and I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Boy, as I was listening to my own bio, I thought, who is that woman? She sounds really busy. I'm just delighted to be here today. I feel very privileged and honored to be asked to do this webinar. And so thank you to the 3PGC community for providing the opportunity, and thank you, Bonnie, for making this very sweet and gentle, getting ready. So my topic today is basically thriving in the midst of chaos, and part of why I chose that topic is that I'm actually leaving the university community where I've been Dean and Director of Counselor Ed for about 4 years in December 18th. And I must say, and I want to stress this, that the community that I've been involved with at Siena Heights has been a uniquely loving and supportive community. And yet, higher education is very volatile right now, very chaotic, very dynamic. And many universities the size of Siena are literally in a position right now where they're fighting for their lives. So it seems like every day we are faced with many urgent situations related to students, finances, administration, etc. And prior to coming to Michigan, I had a private practice in Morgantown, West Virginia, which is also a university community. And many of my private practice and coaching clients were people who work in higher education, professors, deans, students, instructors, admins, and they also seem to be in situations where they were living lives that were pretty busy. And I know that that's just kind of a typical of our modern world right now, that people are communicating with each other 24/7. They're responding to emails 24/7. Their jobs no longer seem to have the confines of being from 9 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock at night. And they're often doing the work of what might have been done 20 years ago, 1.5 or 2 people. And that trend has been noted by many, many folks. So I often think to myself that we're living in a very sped up world, and that in addition to it being a sped up world, that our response to it often seems to be to operate in a state of overwhelm. When I was a private practice psychologist and I had to assign diagnoses to people in order to get payment for their treatment for them, as I was looking through the diagnostic and statistics manual to make sure I did an accurate diagnosis, I would often have the thought that really the only thing this person should be diagnosed with is overwhelm, that they're moving very fast, and in moving very fast and in living in a very chaotic world, they, as I often do, lose a sense of connection to the inner compass that is always guiding us in the right direction, which in the Three Principles community we refer to as the principle of mind. And so I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about the fact that I really think that the way I, in a sense, survived, and not only survived, but thrived, and very often had a wonderful time working in this very dynamic environment over the last 4 years, was because I knew something about the three principles of mind, thought, and consciousness as they had been articulated and described by Sid Banks. They were my, lifeline to sanity many times. So this morning, I was thinking about sort of how I might proceed with this topic. And when I had talked with Bonnie about it some time ago, I mentioned that I was going to try to kind of pin my remarks to this book by Sid Banks called The Second Chance. The Second Chance was Sid's first book, for those of you who may not know that or be aware of it. And if you have not read it, I highly recommend that you do read it. To me, it's one of the most simple of his books, and probably to some degree a little less than others explains specifically what he means by the principles of mind, thought, and consciousness. But the feeling of those principles, for me, for whatever reason, comes through very strongly in the book. And so when I need to get recentered, or when I'm about to do a presentation, or when Bill and I are going to present at a conference, I almost always find myself going back to reading this book. So I probably have read it, no less than 100 times. And yet each time I read it, it seems like there's something new and fresh in it. And one of the first things I thought about when I thought about the book and thought about this presentation was that one of the things that has helped me move gently through the last 4 years of this volatile environment I've been in has been the principle or has been the idea of presence, being in the moment, being present. It's so easy for me, and I won't make the leap of thinking that everyone operates this way, although near as I can tell, it seems like most of us do. It's so easy for me to just get kind of seduced by my thinking, and that before I know it, I'm in my thinking, and I'm not, in a sense, I'm not separate from it, and it is my experience, my total experience. And if my thinking is a little off kilter, then my experience is a lot off kilter. And I do want to say that something that has made a difference for me in living more with a feeling of being more deeply connected to what the true nature of the principles came when I began to stop thinking that my thoughts were just my thoughts. And instead, I began to focus on the power of thought. I see that a lot. I see a lot of times when I'm monitoring, Three Principles, Facebook pages, or different discussions and dialogues, that people will say things like, well, I wish I could sort of figure out how to see this as just my thinking. And I used to think those things to myself. Boy, if I could moment to moment just recognize that these are just my thoughts, maybe I wouldn't get so caught up in them. But where I really felt that I made a quantum leap forward was when I had an insight one day that we are not just talking about our thinking small t. We are talking about this incredible, vibrant, amazing, all-encompassing, crucial, wonderful power of thought. And that with this amazing power of thought, we are, each of us, moment to moment, creating and co-participating in the creation of an entire experience of life. And so a lot of times, like, for example, I'll be driving to work in the morning, and my typical pattern of the day is that even before just as I pop out of bed, I check my email, because I know that there's probably going to be 30 or 40 emails that came into me over the night. And I sort of do this quick scan to see if there's anything I can, quickly get rid of, so that by the time I get to work, I can start to co-focus on the things that may take a little more time. So sometimes as I'm driving my 30-minute ride to work, my mind is just kind of, churning over different things. And I'll suddenly get aware that my stomach is tight and that I'm not breathing, because I'm like in that sped up mode that so many of us seem to live in as a persistent state. And I know that all I have to do is take a deep breath and get present, get in the moment, watch the beauty around me. Sometimes when people read Sid's book, The Second Chance, their reaction will be, oh, I wish he didn't spend so much time talking about how lovely Hawaii is. If you read the book, it's really interesting. The key characters are in Hawaii. And all the way through the book, Sid suddenly stops talking about the protagonist and his experience to understand life, and begins to talk about the beauty of Hawaii and the sea breezes and the sun and the sand and the aromas that are Hawaii. I think that's very deliberate, because I think in his own writing, Sid was modeling for us, I think, how important it is to get present and to be aware of the sensory environment that we're in, and that's automatically very quieting to our minds. And I find that very frequently when I get present, my mind does quiet, and then something very beautiful is able to come through, a deeper quality of thought that takes me in a different direction than my sped up sort of analysis does. Very different direction. And even at work, I would say that is probably the single most important thing that I've learned to remember. When you work in a fairly large community of people, Sienna employs, I think, about 400 people. And there are all kinds of different groups, and, we're all just creating our experience of life, and sometimes having reactions to things, and sometimes having to deal with things like budgets and so forth that aren't pleasant necessarily. And people just innocently start getting very sped up in their analytic thinking about things. And I can do the same thing. And yet I know that so many times I've been spared the embarrassment of having a reaction to something, or saying something that I'm going to have to do some cleanup about, or just totally mistaking a situation, simply because I knew that the answer, when I could feel that my feelings were moving in a direction that wasn't helpful to me, that the answer was to get present. And so many times in fact, I had an example of this yesterday in a meeting where an individual was talking, and I found myself having a little bit of a, sort of a reaction. My thoughts got a little sped up about what he was saying. And I remembered to just be present, and I found myself looking at him, and I thought, oh my goodness, this person looks really tired. I can see the strain in his face. And in that moment, my heart opened up, and I found my own words softening, and my own presence to him softening. And it just changed the tone changed and the entire interaction changed. And something that might have been conflicted or difficult actually, as it ensued, became very healing and positive. And I just still am amazed that sometimes that's all it takes, is just getting present. In the second chance, in the first chapter, Sid talks about the fact that we are guided moment to moment. There's never a second when that guidance stops. And that there is an answer. He says so clearly in his first chapter, there is an answer to everything. There's an answer to everything. If we can just get a little quiet and listen. And he also says that there are always, in every situation that we're in, realities that are beyond the reality that we can see in a given moment. And I think that example with the executive I was sitting with yesterday is, in a sense, proves that. We were in one reality where both of us were using the power of thought and creating a form that was a little edgy and a little conflicted. And all it took was for one of us at that moment to know something about getting present and slowing down a little bit. And suddenly a very different reality emerged, a much more collaborative, deeper, more productive reality. And that's so much of what we need today. We just need, on the political level, on the national level, the international level, but also at the level of our work communities, and maybe most importantly, at the level of our families, we need to be moving so much more slowly in order to move faster toward positive, collaborative solutions to the things that we struggle with. Sometimes when I'm doing coaching, and I frequently, or counseling, and I frequently use the second chance when I'm doing that, people will say, well, but how do you know that we are guided moment to moment? And I would ask all of you who are listening to think about that a little bit. How do you know? I mean, do you believe, do you experience that you are guided moment to moment? Most of the time I find when people really stop to think about that, and when they start having conversations with others about that, what emerges is very interesting stories that people sometimes even go by, they don't even think deeply about, that clearly suggest that there's a lot of evidence that we're guided moment to moment. And I could share dozens of stories from my life, but probably the most current one is that I have decided to leave the university. And it's funny. Sometimes when we make decisions that other people might think of as irrational or ill-advised, that it's on some level, they don't necessarily make sense. I mean, so really, let's get real here. I'm 61 years old. I have a great job. I'm highly paid. Let me say, very adequately paid. I love my work. I love working with students. It seems like I've been able to make an important contribution to the university and to students' lives for 4 years. I mean, why would I leave that? Why would I not go forward and perhaps retire from the university, which was my initial decision, or was my initial thought when I took the job? And I just began, when I got quiet, to have a sense of that my time there was ending, that it was really important for me to be open to moving on. And I've had enough experiences in my life, and I know that all of you have too, when I've made decisions that I couldn't really justify and I wasn't really sure how they were going to work out, but I just trusted them, and they just worked out well for me. Sid talks about in the second chance in the first chapter that there are times in our lives where he even speaks about how sometimes we feel like an energy in our bodies. There's just this felt sense of suddenly connecting to a flow of truth. And he encourages us to trust that. And I began to have that experience with thinking about leaving the university. It was like there was this experience of excitement and like almost an electrical charge that this is the right thing to do. And yet my personal mind went into this very sped up thing, arguing against it. In fact, it argued against it for a number of months. And I had all kinds of reasons why it was important that I not leave. The benefits, where I am in my life and the work that I'm doing there, yada, yada, yada. And I actually found that as I began to share the decision with people and people started questioning it, I started to sort of make up reasons why I was doing it. Because in our world, it's just not good enough to say, well, it just feels right. And it's been quite funny because a number of people have come up to me at work and said, I hear you're leaving. And we hear you're leaving because you want to write a book. And well, what's the backstory? I kind of chuckle and say, well, there really is no backstory. I can't say for sure what I'm going toward. I have some thoughts starting to come, but there's just a feeling of rightness about this. And so many times in my life when I followed that feeling of rightness, that feeling that that experience that can only come from thought of something being right, it has just worked out really, really well. And I've sometimes in ways that I could have never guessed. And right now, I will say that as I'm leaving, I'm watching my team that I've worked with very closely go through a transition. And transitions aren't easy. They're challenging. And the way things have been are not going to be the way they are in the future. And there are moments when I think, oh, this is all my fault. and then I take a deep breath and I know that no, at a level that I can't even comprehend, because I can't see all the realities, that this is right for me. It's right for everybody. It's right for the world at large. It just at some level that I might not be able to appreciate fully makes sense. Well, what one of the most powerful things that Sid says in the first chapter of Second Chance, I think the protagonist asks the question, well, what's your definition of success? And the other key character is kind of grappling with that a little bit. What is my definition of success? And finally says, well, I'm not sure what it is. How do you describe it? And the teacher says, well, it's really one thing: contentment and happiness. It's the only thing. Contentment and happiness. And I think I've heard lots of other three principles facilitators and people who come to know something about the principle say this over and over again, that the more you find a way to live in that state of contentment and happiness, the more you simply sidestep using the power of thinking to create something that isn't content. The more you experience in real time with vividness this guidance that is coming through about how and what to do in life. And that has really sustained me. The power of thought is so incredible. I mean, it is so incredible in such small ways. Like as I mentioned, when I'm driving to work, sometimes innocently, and it is very innocent, I don't wake up and get in the car and think, you know what, I want to have a really miserable 30-minute drive into work. Just the next thing I know, I'm sort of sped up again, and I'm thinking about this or that thing, or this or that crisis, or the fact that this student was unkind to me on the phone or whatever. And all of a sudden I'm having this experience of, well, that's not fair, and I don't like this, and why do I put up with this? And then I often find myself just giggling, just stopping and giggling. It's like, oh my gosh, I did it again. I'm using that incredible power. But then what I do is I get really overwhelmed by the incredulity of the power. Wow, what an amazing gift we have to create our experience of life. And isn't it kind of funny that a minute ago, the experience I was creating was pretty nasty? You know, that it was having a momentary effect on my physiology, and that I didn't feel good, and that the feelings weren't good. And it's like, wow, and that's so cool. It's so cool that I can do that. And that's, to me, is the crux of the title of The Second Chance that has really sustained me over the last 4 years or 5 years in this environment, is in this kind of very fluid environment, is that I always get a second chance. That even if momentarily I've gotten a little lost and I've created some distress and I'm not feeling very kind and I'm in judgment or I'm whatever, that's just the way the power of thought works. And that in the next second, as soon as I'm conscious of what I've done, I can see a different reality, and I, out of that, can create an extremely different experience of life. An experience of life that is grateful, happy, curious, engaged, peaceful. And if you think about the environments you're in and the families you're in, what more can any of us, or what more would any of us want in this world we live in than to have access to our engagement and our curiosity and our creativity, so that we can address the very real challenges that we face. You know, children who get caught up in internet situations, being in a job that just doesn't seem to be well suited to us, you know, dealing with financial crises, dealing with health crises, that I know what we all want is peace. I know what we all want is to feel safe in the sense that we know how to respond to whatever it is that we're facing moment to moment, and to know that we absolutely all have that no matter what, and that nobody can take that away from us. For me, it's just so powerful, and it's so self-forgiving. Sometimes I hear, when I'm working with people around the three principles, so much sort of self-flagellation. It's like, oh, I just am not getting it, or I really got lost again and I did this horrible thing. Or it's like, well, but until we see and appreciate the power of thought a little more deeply and a little more deeply and a little more deeply, and I don't pretend to see it that deeply yet, we are kind of subject to that. But you know what? Guess what? We all get a second chance. It's kind of like, I was thinking about how if we have a knife and it's really sharp, and we keep cutting ourselves on it, you know, with it as we're using it to cook, we have a couple of options. We can really say, gosh darn that dang knife, it's so dang sharp, and I'm always cutting myself on it with it. Or, wow, I have this incredibly sharp, powerful knife. I have to be a little careful, and I have to be respectful in terms of how I use it. And that notion that I have this power of thought, and that in my innocence, I'm not always respectful of it. I'm not always aware of how powerful it is, but that I can keep learning, that I keep getting second chances to learn, that has been helpful to me. It helps me forgive myself when I get lost or I say or do something that's really stupid, I always joke with my husband. Many of you may have seen or heard or met my wonderful, dear, beloved husband, Bill. And he's just so kind, and he lives the principle so deeply. And I'm always joking with him that I'm really sorry that he didn't get an enlightened wife, because I seem to have a very spirited nature, and periodically, certainly a lot less than I did 10 years ago before I knew anything about the principles, will sort of lose my way and have a reaction or get kind of sped up in my thinking. And yet to know that that's happening less, and to know that I'll get a second chance to make it right, and to know that everyone else is just like me, is doing the same thing, has led to so much self and other forgiveness. I remember once reading a book. It wasn't a 3 Principles book. It was a book published by Mary Knoll, Fathers and Brothers, a missionary organization that my first husband was actually a Mary Knoll missioner. And it was after the Amish shootings, where the poor guy who was living in such a state of disconnect killed all those children. And this person wrote a book and said, people who have really, really happy lives have learned to forgive thousands of times a day. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, because we're all kind of going up and down in our level of understanding and our level of consciousness moment to moment. And, and many of us have never, for whatever reason, had or experienced the grace to consciously know something about the principles that we're using to create our experience of life. And yet when you see that, life becomes just so much more gentle. It becomes so much less judgmental. And it makes moving through difficult environments and difficult circumstances so much easier, for a number of reasons. One is that you're much less likely to get caught up in sort of reactions where you're out of harmony with people. And when you're not out of harmony and you're quieter, you just have access to that wisdom that is always coming up from inside. My first business before I met Bill was called Wisdom Sources. And I chose that name because I could see in my own personal life and in the lives of the clients I was counseling that people had access to wisdom, that sometimes when I was sitting with a client who was really struggling, suddenly they would be sharing something that was so loving and so beautiful. Or I knew in my own life that there were moments where I felt like I was just on some sort of roll, that I was just moving gracefully through things and grasping and being able to express a certain amount of common sense in terms of how I handled things around me. And that at other times I would feel very disconnected from it. And I just was on a mission to understand that. I thought, why do I sometimes feel like I'm deeply connected to wisdom, and other times don't feel like I'm connected to it at all? And why does it seem like other people have this connection and then they don't? And at the period of time that I was exploring that, there were a lot of books coming out onto the market on intuition and how to court intuition and how to become more intuitive. I remember reading one that now kind of I laugh about, and I won't mention the name of the author, but I think he had 180 steps that you could follow to be more intuitive. And I was listening to this audio tape in my car because I wanted to be more intuitive. I wanted to have access to that incredible sense of how to move through life gracefully. And boy, I all of a sudden had this thought, wow, he's on like step 80 and I'm exhausted. I can't even remember what step 1 was. There are so many steps that have come since. This isn't really going to be very helpful to me. So when I saw the simplicity of the only thing that can ever disconnect me from the power of mind, wisdom, intuition, whatever you want to call it, is that innocently, I have forgotten the power of thought. I used to say misused the power of thought. Word doesn't quite work with me anymore. I feel more like my experience is that I momentarily just forget that thought is so powerful, and that if I don't like the moment I'm in, that if I just quiet down a little bit, the power of mind, thought, and consciousness will guide me to have an entirely different experience. It's kind of like, if you think about it, if our politicians or the people who ran our corporations, or even bringing it down to the level of family, if the parents who are raising the children of today, if we all felt that, if we all just knew that there is nothing that is outside of our capacity to respond to with a positive collaborative solution. And that it only took getting present, getting quiet, just how different it could be. And really, in some ways, it's as simple as learning to have respect and understanding for the truly incredible creative power of thought. One of the things I felt very fortunate that I got to meet Sid Banks. And actually, it was kind of funny. When my husband and I got married 12 years ago, we kind of met and courted and got married very fast. It was about 6 months. We just knew that we were meant to be together. Met on Valentine's Day and got married in September. And not a week after we got married, Sid called up, because he was in fairly common and constant contact with my husband, Bill. And he said, he invited us to Salt Spring Island to spend some time with him. And he told me that one of the reasons he wanted us to come is that he wanted to check me out. He wanted to find out who this Bill Pettit, one of his key facilitators of the three principles, had married. And one of the things that struck me about that whole experience, we spent a week there reading Sid's book and meeting with him and talking with him, getting to know him. He was so wonderfully sweet. But one of the things that really struck me is he said to me at one point, "Linda, this is just really all so simple. People try to make it really complex, but it's really all very simple. And it's simple in that there are these really powerful gifts that we've been given to make our way through life. Really, that's all there is to it." And 12 years later, I think I'm just beginning to get a little bit of a glimpse of that it really is very simple. It's really not rocket science. And that we all really do, at some deep level, we know the reality of it. We know the truth of it. It's our birthright. It's our nature to understand it. And that the principles of mind, thought, and consciousness do hold the key to the solutions that we're looking for the little problems in our lives and the big problems in our lives. They do give us what we need to, or show us, they help us understand what we need to understand in order to make our way peacefully and gently and calmly and in a contented way through this very sped up sort of chaotic world that we live in. Sometimes I get a little scared for the world today when I see how frantic people are. My students are often pretty frantic about their lives. The clients I work with are frantic about their lives. And we call that mental illness. And we give it names and we have diagnostic classifications for it. And it just is sad when you know that the solution is so simple, that the solution rests in people seeing that slowing down, understanding the nature of the powerful gifts we're using to create life, and not taking so seriously the forms we create in our head, it is the answer. In his book Second Chance, in the first chapter, I think I really encourage you to read this book. I mean, I was just really struck by rereading it again the last couple of days. Like, wow, this is just really powerful stuff. At one point, Sid talks about failure, and he maybe think about yourself for a moment. Have you ever felt like you failed at anything? I mean, I know that I have thought that, oh gosh, if I'd only known, or, this didn't work out well, or this business venture didn't do what I thought it would do, whatever. But Sid talks about the experience of failure begins as a seed of thought, and it can only grow as you, in a sense, nurture it. And that the more you nurture that form, the more real it seems. And the more you sort of compound the experience of being and seeing yourself as a failure. And failure is just one word. We could use a dozen other examples, incompetent or not purposeful or whatever, but it all begins with a seed of thought. It all begins with a seed of thought that if we're quiet, something comes through that can help us see a different seed of thought that takes us in a different direction. It's very, very powerful. Sometimes, at work, and again, not 100% of the time, not all the time, but I just am struck that when I'm with some people and we're trying to get something done, and maybe tempers are flaring a little bit, or people are getting a little edgy because there's a lot of work to be done, and who's going to do it, and how's it going to get parceled out, or different people have very different opinions about how to get things done. And I find myself getting all caught up, and I'm getting into this thought that I'm the leader and I need to figure out how to respond here, and I need to figure out what we're going to do and make some decisions. That in a moment, if I can just get present and realize that I'm sitting with a group of really beautiful, creative, amazing human beings, that something in the shift of my focus changes the entire dynamic of the situation. Something in the shift of my focus changes the dynamic in the entire situation. It is like we're all connected as energy, but people somehow sense that the energy is shifting and they shift with it. So probably one of the most powerful things that I ever heard Sid say, at least, and it's funny how all of us are impacted differently. There are different things that speak to us. But one of the things that he says in one of his books is, and he has said often when I heard him speak, was always, 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 not once in a while or when it's convenient, or you might want to think about this, but he said, always look for the beauty. Always look for the beauty in situations and in people. I think that's a pathway that presence opens up. when I find myself getting present with people, it just like, it's like that's where my attention goes. Oh my gosh, that was the most cool thing that so-and-so just said. Or, oh my gosh, I never thought about that way. Or, oh my gosh, what if we put this and this idea together? And it turns the situation around a little bit, and we see it new and differently. It isn't even that I have to articulate any of that to people. It's just that I have noticed over and over again that when I have that shift, it shifts something externally. And the whole feeling, the tone in the room will get lighter, and people will start joking or having fun. One of the things that one of my colleagues said to me a couple of days ago, she said, one of the things I'm going to miss most about working with you, Linda, is that we're always laughing. We're always laughing. So in the middle of all the chaotic stuff we deal with, we find lots of moments to just really laugh. And it's because I think all of us are in that space where we see each other as beautiful human beings who have answers within us, and we really trust that. And we know that that's more likely to come to the surface when we're in that good feeling of laughter and just contentment. Even as I'm talking, I get aware of myself talking once in a while, and it's sort of like, wow, yeah. I mean, that's not an easy business sell, right? To say to folks who are in business today, or, well, what you got to do is laugh more, or what you got to do is look for the beauty in each other more, or what you got to do is get present more. We find much more business-like ways to say that. But in truth, it really, really is pretty simple. I see there's a question here, so I'm going to go ahead and attend to that question. Can you talk about how the state of mind is the filter through which the thought is passing? How the state of mind created or creates the feeling? I'm not sure, Iwan, that I know exactly how to respond to the question. I don't know that I understand it. And so you might, I'll talk a little bit, and if the words come to you about how to phrase it a little more differently or specifically, I'll keep trying. To me, state of mind is, it's just another word that the Three Principles set of words that the Three Principles community has used to describe the state that we're living in a moment, the consciousness that we're living in a moment. And we experience it both emotionally, sensorily, and we experience it, as thinking that we're doing. But they're completely connected. I do think as I've been working with people in the Three Principles community, that the pathway to understanding this seems to be a little different sometimes from person to person. The way I understand it is through my feeling. One of the simplicities of the principles to me is knowing that I have this barometer that is 100% accurate, that always tells me whether my thinking is trustworthy. And that barometer is my feeling state. So if I'm, it's really simple to me that if I'm aware of my feeling, and my feeling is lighthearted, or curious, or engaged, or absorbed, or happy, or positive, whatever, I could use probably hundreds of different adjectives, that in that moment I can trust my thinking 100%. But if my feelings are angry or upset or discontented or judgmental or whatever, I know in that moment that my thinking is not trustworthy, that somehow very innocently I've been using the extraordinary capacity of thought to create an experience that is not good for me physically, and it's not good for the world. It's not good for the family or the community that I'm working with or working in at that moment. So finding a way to a state of mind for me is more about being aware of the feeling that I'm in and then getting present, knowing that if I just get present and I do some of the things that I've been talking about, focus on the beauty, for example, that my feeling is going to shift, that the thinking is going to shift. So I'm having a hard time because I don't know that I really understand for sure about the state of mind as a filter, but I'll keep thinking about it. Another question here: when you have a shift in your feeling while working in a group, do you ever talk about the 3 principles, or do you stay on task? That's a good question, Elaine. I would say by hindsight, there are times when I wish I had talked more about the 3 principles. But no, I tend to just go about working at changing my own feeling level and being aware of my own feeling level, because I know that that's all I need, and the feeling level of the group is going to shift. Now, when it comes to teaching my students, I do when I teach, talk to them about the 3 principles and try to help them understand more specifically and consciously what the 3 principles are. When I'm in a low mood, almost every thought that comes through is colored from the state of mind, and vice versa. That was a clarification from the person who asked the question before. I understand what you're saying, that when you're in a low mood, that mood is literally coming out of your eyeballs, right? It does color everything that you see. But I would still say that the answer is understanding the mood as something that is self-created through the extraordinary power of thought, innocently. And we have to somehow get by giving a lot of power to that mood. There's a clarification coming through. Elaine, I want to go back to your question and say too that if I'm working in a group that knows something about the 3 principles, absolutely I would do what you're suggesting and maybe talk more directly about the 3 principles. In a lot of the situations that I've been in over the last couple of years, and the environments I've been in, most of the people know absolutely nothing about the 3 principles. And so for me to suddenly start talking about them, when we're trying to deal with budget issues or something, for example, just wouldn't make much sense. But I totally trust that if my feeling level shifts and my presence shifts and my awareness shifts, that will have an impact on the group. And I've seen it over and over and over again. So it's kind of like I just take care of my own peace and trust that will have an impact, and that when there are opportunities to more consciously teach the principles, I certainly do that, because I know they're the answer to peace. I think there's something here about an example. I'm going to take a minute and see if I can click on it. Bonnie, are you seeing a clarification from this person, or?
I see, for example, and I'm wondering if he's referring to his comment.
Okay.
Or I'm not sure. If he meant the comment when I'm in a low mood, almost every thought.
What was funny, what came to mind for me is, I remember this was when I was learning about the 3 principles 12 years ago when I first met Bill. And make no mistake, that was not an easy journey. I did not have an epiphany and suddenly say, oh my goodness, Dr. Pettit, I see the light. This is so cool. It's so wonderful. I really fought the understanding for about 2 years. And Bill and I laugh and joke about it now that he learned not to push it with me. But I remember one day I'd had a small surgery. It was not terrible, but, you know, small surgery, and I was home recovering, and I wasn't feeling very well. And I remember thinking all kinds of really negative thoughts about my husband, like, he's not helping me enough. And, you know, what a jerk. He's not being very comforting. And doesn't he understand how miserable I am? And, you know, on and on. I was just in a state, probably partially affected by the anesthesia and the medications I was taking. But all of a sudden I thought, oh, wow, all this is about is that I'm in a low mood. I'm just in a low mood. And that my mind is doing what the human mind does and the brain does when I've just kind of gotten sped up. I like that term, sped up, because my thinking, whenever that happens, does have the quality of just being kind of fast and insistent. But recognizing again that innocently I was using the power of this incredible gift of thought to feed that low mood was powerful. I started to laugh. I just started to laugh, and it was done. So I'm getting a clarification here. For example, I've had a rough with my partner before going to work, and it lowered my mood. In the car is also my kid saying something completely different. I shout at him. Yeah, I can relate to all of that. You know, that sometimes that happens. And that's what the second chance is always about, that you never know when in the next moment you're suddenly going to say, wow, I just got a little sped up, and I innocently was using this incredible power of thought to create an experience that didn't serve me, didn't serve my family, didn't serve my partner. And can I forgive myself in a moment for just being human and have a go at it again, make it right? Not beat myself up about it. Just recognize that that's the human experience, that we're all moving through life using these gifts, using them as best as we know how, and on a lifelong journey to understand that deeper. I almost feel silly in a way being a speaker on a call like this, because I see my understanding as being, you know, just a glimmer. But I also know that it's a glimmer that's growing stronger and stronger, and that I'm on a lifelong journey with it. But it certainly doesn't get easier when I beat myself up about it, or I try to analyze why I'm doing things wrong, or I get panicky or frantic about the fact that, you know, I lost my way. The leaps for me have come farther and faster from a place of curiosity and self-forgiveness. Wow, I forgive myself. I sort of lost my way there. And boy, I'm really curious about what happened. And wow, that I have a minute. The next minute is always fresh, and I get a second chance to make it right. There's another question here. Do you have any recommendations for formal training as a 3P practitioner? Is it best to have a PhD or a mental health degree of some kind? What sort of qualifications is needed to be considered a legitimate purveyor of 3P training? People may have different thoughts about that, but you know, it's not like we're training about something we don't know. We're just training, or we're just learning to understand ourselves deeply, and then sharing that with other people. I do not think that a formal degree in mental health or a PhD is necessary to learn and teach the principles. That's the beauty of it. I was a mental health practitioner and a PhD for many years before I learned anything about the principles. And I became a much, much better mental health practitioner, a much more effective mental health practitioner when I learned about the 3 principles. I would guide anyone and everyone who has any interest in this to read Sid Banks's books and to watch his videos. When I was doing mental health therapy, every client that I started working with in the second session would begin the practice of starting their therapy session by watching a 20-minute segment of a Sid Banks video. So I have watched those videos thousands of times and never with boredom. You know, it was like always fresh and always curious to see how the person I was watching them with would get impacted. There is so much power there in the original source material. And I have seen people get exposed to that source material and quantum leap in their understanding over me. They understand or glimpse something or have an insight that as they share it with me is so fresh, it takes my breath away. I think you can be a legitimate 3 principles practitioner when you start to see in your own life that you're experiencing more and more happiness, and you see how that works. I remember once having a conversation with Sid. I had been working with Bill to understand the 3 principles, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to go out and actually start using it therapeutically as a practitioner. And so Sid happened to call Bill, and Bill wasn't home. And so Sid and I had this lovely 90-minute conversation about this, that, and the other thing. He was really funny. And at one point I said to him, well, Sid, I'm kind of thinking I'm almost at the place where I'm qualified to go out. And mind you, I already had my PhD, that I'm qualified to go out and maybe share a little bit about these 3 principles. But I don't know. I don't know where I would start. I don't know exactly how I would go about it. And Sid chuckled and he said, oh, dearie, it's really very simple. Just tell them what you see, and that'll be enough. What people need is only the littlest bit, and the littlest bit can put them on a lifelong journey to see things deeper. Just don't ever try to teach what you don't see, because people will sense that it's not truthful. And I remember being impacted at the heart level by that and saying, okay, I can do that. I've seen a few little things. I'll go share those. And the next day I did it. The next day I started. And the results were amazing. That I could see that people, just in the little bit that I was sharing, and I had concrete evidence of that because I was also doing measurements of my work at the time, that people were not only seeing something that I had seen, they were seeing something that leaped over what I had seen. And that leaping over would help me leap the next step. So my clients were starting to teach me things, and that continues to this day. So legitimate purveyor, I think it's really more about genuinely having humility and not necessarily seeing yourself as a training person or a facilitator until in your own life you're seeing your own insights and recognizing the impact that they're having on your world. And when that starts happening, then you're a trainer, then you can share it. I remember once, and I know I have to end, I was working with this client who was a bartender. And she was delightful, a young bartender. And I think I had 2 sessions with her, and we watched some Sid Banks videos, and she just had a number of insights that had really helped her. It was one of those things where I don't think I saw her more than 3 or 4 times, and she got by what was she'd really been struggling with. And she said to me, oh my gosh, Dr. Pettit, so as I'm at the bar and I'm serving drinks, I'm starting to teach people about the power of thought and about the power of consciousness and the power of mind. And she said, what's happening is amazing. She said, I've had people start sobbing and look at me and say, how do you know this? And she said, I get a little scared because I just don't really know that I know that much. I mean, so was she being a 3 principles practitioner in that moment? You know, absolutely. And who knows what kind of impact that she had. But she had recognized her own insights, seen them make a difference in her life, and had the courage to share them. And she had the humility to only share what she herself had seen. I think that is, if anyone stays with that, they can never go wrong. Where can we buy Sid Banks's videos? Lone Pine Publishing can provide access to all of the Sid Banks videos. They're very reasonable to buy. But I also understand that on the 3PGC website, you can now freely stream the 4 Long Beach videos. So that's wonderful. We didn't have that even 5 years ago. You can go, or you can tell your clients to go to the website and they can access the Long Beach videos. There are 4 of them.
Oh, Linda, thank you so much. This was wonderful for me. I'm sure it was for everyone viewing as well. Just want to give you the opportunity. Is there anything you'd like to say to wrap it up today?
No, just really want to thank people for taking the time and to encourage you on your journeys with this. You know, it's powerfully transformative to have the understanding. So just more thank you. Very grateful for this opportunity.
Thank you. And I just want to remind everyone, next month, the webinar will be on November 12th. It will be at noon Eastern time again, and it's with Jonathan Pounder. So again, Linda, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and sharing your understanding. It was absolutely beautiful, a beautiful hour. Thank you.
Thank you.